Your phone is vibrating, but instead of excitement, you feel dread. Why did the tool designed for convenience become your biggest source of stress? This is the dark psychological paradox of texting fatigue, a phenomenon that transforms digital contact into a chore. And what we're exploring here isn't just about being too busy to text back. It's a much deeper emotional and cognitive exhaustion. It's that feeling of being on call 24/7, not for your job, but for the validation of other people. This is a very modern kind of anxiety, and it's being weaponized through the exact device that was supposed to connect us all. Okay, let's dive into this. So here's our game plan. We're going to break this all down in 6 parts. It's really a journey from understanding the problem to actually finding the solution. We'll kick things off by digging into that feeling of dread. Then we'll give it a name, digital servitude. After that, we'll look at the addictive cycle this creates in our brains, explore the psychology of control that's pulling the strings, and, most importantly, lay out a clear protocol for you to reclaim your peace. It all leads up to that final choice, choosing your own peace over the constant demand for your presence. So let's start right there with that core paradox. Communication tech promised us this seamless connection, right? The ability to be closer than ever. But for so many of us, every little notification just brings a spike of anxiety, this heavy weight of obligation. The tool has somehow become the master. That buzz in your pocket, it's no longer just a hello from a friend. It feels more like a demand for your immediate attention and your emotional labor. And this brings us to a really crucial term we need to understand this whole experience. We have to move past just calling it burnout. What's happening here is more personal, more insidious. It's not just about being overworked. It's about our personal connections being twisted into this source of constant, low-level duty, a form of servitude, really. This is the point where communication stops being a two-way street and just becomes a one-way command for your time and energy. So let's get a formal definition on the table. Texting fatigue. It's that specific draining exhaustion that comes from the perceived need to be constantly available and to perform correctly in your digital life. And I really want to stress that word, perceived. It isn't just about how many messages you get. It's about that internal pressure. The pressure to write the perfect reply, to be fast enough, to manage the other person's emotions through a screen. Suddenly, that search for validation becomes this toxic, high-stakes chore. And this idea of digital servitude really gets to the heart of the dynamic. This isn't a partnership, it's a hierarchy. It's a conditioned response. See, over time, through this subtle pattern of rewards and punishments, you're basically trained to put someone else's digital needs, their need for a quick reply, for constant reassurance, ahead of your own need for peace. Your phone becomes the very symbol of that obligation. So how is this servitude actually enforced? Well, these are the specific tactics, and it's so important to see them as patterns of manipulation, not just quirks. First, you've got rapid-fire messaging. This just overwhelms you, creates this false sense of urgency that makes your own life feel secondary. Then there's punitive silence, the digital cold shoulder. By not replying, the manipulator makes you anxious, gets you wondering what you did wrong. And maybe the most draining of all is strategic ambiguity. Sending those vague, emotionally loaded texts that force you to do all the heavy lifting to figure out what they mean, keeping you hooked and guessing. So how does this actually get its hooks into our brains? Because this isn't just about willpower or, having bad habits. This is a systematic neurological process. The anxiety, that compulsive need to check your phone, that's the intended result of a really powerful conditioning cycle. Let's take a look at how this gets wired into our brains. The first stage of this trap is a state called chronic vigilance. Now, this is more than just a habit. This is your nervous system getting stuck on high alert. You're not checking your phone for fun anymore. You're checking it out of fear. Fear of being punished, of being misunderstood, a fear of some kind of social penalty for not being on 24/7. Your brain learns that the phone is a potential threat, so it decides it has to be monitored constantly. So what's the engine driving this whole machine? It's a classic psychological trick called intermittent reinforcement. It's the exact same mechanism that makes slot machines so addictive. Here's how it works. First, an unspoken rule is set. You have to respond immediately. Then, when you do, the results are totally unpredictable. Sometimes you get a warm, approving reply. That's the reward. Other times you get silence or a cold shoulder. That's the punishment. Because you never know which one you're going to get, your brain becomes obsessed with chasing that next reward. And that creates the compulsive loop of checking and replying. All this constant switching back and forth from your real life to managing this digital anxiety, well, that's what leads directly to burnout.
Okay, so we've seen how this cycle of fatigue gets built, but to really break it, we need to understand why it happens. What are the motivations here? What's driving the person demanding all this attention, and what's driving the person who feels pressured to give it? It all comes down to the underlying psychological needs this whole toxic dynamic is trying to fulfill. This slide just lays out the transaction in really stark terms. This is not a relationship of equals. The manipulator is driven by a need for what psychologists call supply security, basically a constant source of attention and validation to feel okay. Your constant availability is their emotional fuel. On the other side, though, your motivation isn't about power. It's about trying to reduce your own anxiety, trying to avoid the pain of rejection or being abandoned.
And this brings us to a really key vulnerability: anxious attachment. This is a term for deep-seated fear of being left alone, which can cause a person to become hypervigilant for any sign of rejection. In our digital world, that means compulsively checking texts, response times, even emojis, all just to feel secure in a relationship. A manipulator doesn't necessarily create this anxiety, but they are experts at finding it and using it to their advantage. So why on earth do we keep coming back for more, even when it feels so awful? Well, it comes down to a chemical hook in our brains. Every single time you check your phone and see a message, any message, your brain gets a tiny little hit of dopamine, the reward chemical. This reinforces the behavior of checking. It's a cruel irony, really. Even if the message itself makes you anxious, the simple act of getting a response provides a little neurochemical reward that keeps you stuck in that compulsive loop.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem, we've looked at the mechanism, we get the psychology, now we pivot from analysis to action. And this is so important. This is not a hopeless situation. There is a clear, actionable protocol for taking back control of your attention and your peace of mind. Let's get into this defense plan. This is your 3-step plan to basically build a fortress around your focus. First, create a sanctuary for your mind. Define non-negotiable digital hours. Maybe that's 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Your phone goes on Do Not Disturb, and you are officially off the clock. Second, stop playing the interpretation game. If a text is ambiguous or emotionally charged, don't text back, call them. And third, and this is critical, you have to starve the addiction. Turn off notifications for everything that isn't from a real human. This breaks that cycle of constant low-grade dopamine hits that fuels the whole compulsion.
And this idea right here is the strategic heart of that second step. Ambiguous texts put the entire cognitive load, all the mental work of figuring out what they mean, squarely on your shoulders. When you refuse to play that game and instead pick up the phone, you are handing that work right back to them. You're saying if you want to communicate something important, it's your job to be clear. This one move can dramatically cut down on your mental exhaustion.
We've covered a lot of ground here, haven't we? From that first sinking feeling of dread all the way to a concrete plan for defense. So let's bring it all together and really lock in the final, most important takeaway from this whole thing. What's the core lesson here? And how do we move forward?
Let's just be absolutely clear. Texting fatigue is not your fault. It is the direct result of a perfectly normal human need, the need for validation, being twisted and weaponized into a toxic, unending expectation of digital performance. Your anxiety isn't a character flaw. It's the price this system is designed to make you pay. And the mechanism that makes this whole trap work, it can be boiled down to this one sentence. It's a perfect storm. An unpredictable reward system preys on a deep-seated fear. And the result is a brain that just can't stop checking, always hoping for reassurance, but usually just finding more anxiety.
But here's the empowering truth. Simply understanding this pattern is the most powerful step you can take to break it. Awareness is the antidote. Once you can see the game for what it is, you can choose not to play. By defining your own digital boundaries, by breaking that compulsive loop, you are making a conscious choice. You are choosing your own mental health. You are choosing peace over the exhausting anxiety of always being on.
So I want to leave you with this one final thought. We've been conditioned to believe that every buzz, every ping is some kind of emergency that needs our attention. But it's not. The real emergency, the only one that truly requires an immediate response, is that quiet internal signal that your mind has had enough and is asking for peace. That right there is the most important notification you will ever receive. It isn't a demand from someone else, it's an invitation from yourself. Your mind is requesting peace. The only question left is, will you answer?